I want to explore the question, do Muslims belong in the West? Now, the very short answer is yes, but the longer answer might be the following. And I'm going to be sharing some words from this book by Abdul Hakim Arad, Traveling Home, Essays on Islam in Europe. And he is, of course, Tim Winter, otherwise known as Tim Winter, professor at Cambridge University and a convert to Islam. And this whole book really is an answer to that question about our role as Muslims in the West, in Europe particularly. So do we belong in Europe? Do we belong in the West? Well, he, at the very beginning of the book, makes some fascinating comments, and he writes in a quite concise academic style. So it's not always very easy to access what he's saying. So I'm going to read what he says and maybe make some comments, but it's always worth attending to what he says. Very insightful, brilliant commentary on this subject, because I've noticed in recent weeks, largely because of the war on Gaza, that the press in Britain, Telegraph, the GB News, the Daily Mail, the Times, all the usual kind of big media outlets, news agencies have, and the government itself, of course, has very upped the rhetoric about Muslims, not least for their support of Palestinians who are being slaughtered in an unprecedented carnage, but also demonizing Muslims in this country for the UK, for their support of the Palestinians in their terrible situation. And any attempt to articulate an opposition to what's happening to them, to protest against it, to cry out against the crimes of the Israeli regime are demonized, they're delegitimized. People have been told by the government to stop demonstrating very explicitly. And now we're seeing dark mutterings in the press about people who don't belong here. Now, they're not saying usually openly Muslims don't belong here, but clearly we all know who they're referring to. The narrative has been built up over weeks and months and longer. So it's getting ugly here, and there's an election looming here in the UK as well. So I think there's a bit of that to do with it. And we have the probable election of Trump in the States and a whole host of European countries where we quite likely see far-right populist parties coming to power soon, France, maybe Germany, Italy, and so on. So the Muslims in Europe, in the West, are the scapegoat for a whole host of reasons. But the question must be asked, do we belong in Europe? Because a lot of people are asking this question negatively. And I think, as I say, there's a profound and enduring and very real reason why we do belong here, why we have an excellent right to live in the West. And I wanted to share, as I say, what Abdul Hakim Arad says about this, because I think he gives the deepest reason of all why we truly belong in the West. So I'm going to read some of his words and then comment on them. I say they are not as easy to access as one might wish, but that's not a problem. I think that they are beautifully written words. And he says, in the introduction, actually, he says the following: Muslims find themselves at home everywhere. The universalism of Islam enables a local rooting, which recognizes that wheresoever you may turn, there is God's face. That's a quote from the Quran, of course, 3:115. And then he continues on another place. Such is this Muslim sense of belonging that believers feel more at home in any place in the world than any atheist could, since to lose contact with God is immediately to forfeit one's sense of connection to a place of his making. It is to feel one's roots and identity shrivel. There can be no truly English, German, or Russian atheist. From this kind of Muslim perspective, Lenin was not Russian, Douglas Murray is not British, and Sam Harris is not American. Now, these people, of course, Douglas Murray and Sam Harris, are notorious people who attack Islam and Muslims all the time. They say some very horrible things, and they're atheists as well. And they articulate a powerful stream of thought in the West, which is gaining in popularity, whether or not it's atheist, but it's certainly anti-Muslim. And Tim Winter continues, they seem to wait in a forlorn encampment, even when officially at home. So even though they technically live in these countries, England, America, and so on, they're alienated from it because they have lost the roots, the deep metaphysical belongingness that truly belongs to people who believe in God and follow him. So their atheism, in a sense, makes them alien from the very land that they claim to represent. By contrast, Abdul Hakim says, to become Muslim or to arrive from an Islamically Abrahamic place and to maintain that traditional sensibility which perceives God's signs superabundantly everywhere, is to immediately see the land with understanding, and hence to begin to grow roots and to adorn and engage the earth. Oh, this is poetry to me. So, Muslims understand the place, the reason for this world existing. They understand that this is God's earth. They see his signs everywhere, whether it be in England or America or whatever. And they understand the purpose of life. And so they can grow roots, authentic roots, because they are God's people. They can understand God's commandments. They follow them, inshallah. So that's why they're so different from others who have no connection with the meaning, the deep meaning and purpose of our lives on earth and in Europe. He continues, such, very roughly, is the Islamic theory of Abrahamic mobility. Unlike Israel's wandering in exile, this is the biblical Israel, unlike Israel's wandering in exile, which await the messianic intervention, which will take the people to a home greater than all homes, Muslims travel from one home to an equal other. So in other words, if they migrate, say, from Africa or Pakistan or India or wherever to Europe or the West, they're moving from one equal home to another because this is God's world. And they do not cherish a return to the mother of cities, except as visitors. And this is a reference, of course, to Mecca and Medina, visitors to those two holiest shrines, pilgrimage places. So we'll happily go there as visitors. But we don't want to necessarily live there. We can live anywhere in God's world. They migrate Abrahamically, he says, but every country for them is a promised land. Every country in the world, it being God's world, is a promised land because we can live freely in God's earth. So I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. At a deeper metaphysical, theological level, we profoundly belong in the West, as we profoundly belong everywhere, whether it be anywhere in the world, because we are meant to be here. And the prominent Islamophobes like Douglas Murray and Sam Harris and others, who are often atheists, have no deep sense of belonging here at all, because they are cut off from the root, the taproot of their reason for existing. And they've lost contact with that fundamental reality. And that is why Muslims truly belong. And as Tim Winter says, there can be no truly English, German, or Russian atheist. They seem to wait in a forlorn foreign encampment, even when officially at home, because they are alienated from their country, their deep traditions, its history, because most of England's history, of course, is profoundly Christian, and they are even cut off from that. And that is the sad state of affairs. So do we belong here? Of course we do, despite what some people would have us believe. And of course, we're not going anywhere anyway. So they're going to have to deal with us meaning the Muslims in the West, and all those others who truly put God first rather than the dunya, the individualism, the materialism of the West. Those who are truly in touch with the purpose of life, the reason we even exist, the reason why the earth exists, truly, deeply, profoundly belong. And that's why the answer is yes to the question at the beginning. Until next time.